The United States Army Corps of Engineers is building a wall, not on land, not with steel or concrete, but deep beneath the surface of America's greatest river, using nothing but sand and water. They are engaged in a desperate, almost invisible battle at the bottom of the Mississippi River, and if they lose, a major American city could lose its drinking water. The enemy is not an army. It is the Atlantic Ocean itself. An invisible wedge of dense, heavy salt water is crawling backward, upstream, against the current of the river. It is a fundamental reversal of nature, silent and relentless. This is not a forecast. It is not a simulation. It is happening right now. And it is a consequence of something that started 1,000 miles away. A catastrophe measured in negative numbers. In October 2023, the river gauge in Memphis, Tennessee, which measures the river's depth, hit an all-time record low of negative 12.0 feet. Not zero. Negative, so low it fell below the established floor of measurement itself. If you live anywhere near this river, or even if you just buy groceries in this country, this story affects you. Let me know in the comments below where you're watching from, because this is a national story with local consequences. The river that defines America is being starved, and the ocean is moving in to take its place. Over 80% of the people who watch our documentaries are not subscribed. We have one of the lowest subscription rates on the platform for our viewership. If we're going to keep making deep dives like this, we need that to change. Take 1 second, hit the subscribe button. It's the single most important thing you can do to support this work. Let's begin. To stop the ocean, the Army Corps is building an underwater levee near a place called Myrtle Grove, Louisiana, a massive ridge of sediment dumped onto the riverbed, designed to physically trip the salt water and force it back to the sea. It is a monumental feat of emergency engineering. It should have worked. But here's what they didn't tell you. The wall is temporary. The drought is not. So the real question is, did the Army Corps just save New Orleans? Or did they just build a sandcastle against a rising tide that cannot be stopped? The fate of New Orleans and the entire Mississippi River Delta is not decided in Louisiana. The blue skies over the French Quarter mean nothing. The afternoon thunderstorms that drench Baton Rouge are irrelevant. The Mississippi River is an artery that begins its life a continent away, and its pulse is dictated by weather systems that the people on the coast never even see. Louisiana State climatologist Jay Grimes has been trying to explain this for years. An infinitesimally small fraction of the rain that falls over Louisiana actually finds its way into the Mississippi River. The river is a colossal drainage pipe for 32 American states and 2 Canadian provinces. Its health is determined almost entirely north of Natchez, Mississippi. The single most important junction in this entire system is a small, quiet town in southern Illinois. Cairo. At Cairo, the Ohio River merges with the Mississippi, and in a normal year, it acts as a heart transplant. The Ohio River Valley, sprawling across the industrial Midwest, is supposed to contribute up to 50% of the total volume of water in the lower Mississippi. Half the river's lifeblood comes from this one single tributary. It is the engine that gives the Mississippi the power to push back against the Gulf of Mexico. And in 2025, that engine failed. A multi-year, soul-crushing drought had settled over the Midwest. Not a dry summer, a generational shift in weather patterns. Fields in Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky turned to dust. The rains that should have fed the creeks, that fed the streams, that fed the Ohio River, simply vanished. By September of 2025, the flow from the Ohio River into the Mississippi had fallen to a catastrophic 8% of the total water volume. Not 50. 8. The heart of the system was in cardiac arrest. The effects downstream were immediate and brutal. The gauge at Memphis, Tennessee, became the definitive marker of the crisis. A 0 reading on that gauge does not mean the river is empty. It is a baseline, an average low water mark established over decades of measurement. When the readings go negative, it means the river has fallen below that historic floor. It is operating in uncharted territory. In October 22, it hit negative 10.7 feet. Unprecedented then, in October 2023, it shattered that record, plunging to negative 12.0 feet. As of June 2026, after years of this sustained crisis, the reading hovered near negative 10.8 feet. This was not a spike. It's not an anomaly. It is the new reality. To see it is to understand the scale of the loss. The river, a mile wide in places, shrinks, vast sandbars. Some the size of shopping malls emerge from the water, their pale surfaces baking in the sun. Islands that had been submerged for a century became part of the landscape. The river that defined American power and commerce looked weak, anemic, in places. It was a shadow of its former self, a creek pretending to be a continent spanning waterway. And this is the part of the story most people miss. The cause is invisible from the side of the effect. It's a 1,000-mile-long chain reaction. And it raises a critical question. How do you solve a problem when the source is in a completely different part of the country? Let me know your thoughts on that in the comments below. It's a central dilemma. This is not just an environmental curiosity. It is an economic nuclear bomb. The Mississippi River is not a scenic waterway. It is a superhighway. A heavily engineered, 2,300-mile-long conveyor belt for the American economy. Approximately 60% of all grain exported from the United States, the corn, soybeans, and wheat that feed the world, travels down this river on fleets of barges. Around 500 million tons of total cargo, from petroleum to coal to steel, moves on this water every single year. When the water level drops, that conveyor belt grinds to a halt. Barges, which are designed to operate in a channel maintained by the Army Corps at a minimum depth of 9 feet, suddenly find themselves scraping bottom. They run aground. A single stuck barge can block the entire channel for days, creating a traffic jam of stalled commerce stretching for dozens of miles. To avoid this, shipping companies are forced to take drastic measures. They can no longer load their barges to full capacity. A barge that used to carry 1,500 tons of soybeans might now only carry 1,200 or 1,000. That means more barges are needed to carry the same amount of cargo. More fuel, more time. The efficiency of the entire system collapses, and the cost is passed on. In 2024, shippers were paying a premium surcharge of over $200 per ton just for the privilege of moving grain on this dangerously shallow river. We're about to get into the engineering battle happening right now at the mouth of the river. If you're getting value from this analysis, take a second to hit the like button. It tells the algorithm this is a story worth sharing. And if you have family or friends in Louisiana, Texas, or anywhere that relies on shipping, share this with them. They need to know what's happening. Multiply that cost across 500 million tons of cargo, and you begin to understand the scale of the economic damage. The 2023 crisis alone is estimated to have cost the U.S. economy over $20 billion. $20 billion. Lost revenue, delayed shipments, spoiled crops, and farmers unable to get their product to market. The price of bread in Cairo, Egypt, is directly connected to the water level in Cairo, Illinois when the Mississippi falters. The global food supply chain shudders. And as the river was failing, a more insidious threat was gathering force at its mouth. To understand what's happening in South Louisiana, you have to forget everything you think you know about how a river works. South of Natchez, Mississippi, the bed of the river actually drops below sea level. It is a deep, downward-sloping trench carved into the earth. The only thing that prevents the Gulf of Mexico from flooding that trench and turning the entire lower river into a saltwater estuary is the immense power and volume of fresh water flowing south from the heart of the continent. It is a constant kinetic battle between river and ocean. A battle of pressure. For millennia, the river has won that battle, Now, it is losing. As the flow from the drought-stricken Midwest weakens, the pressure drops. The dense, cold, heavy saltwater of the Gulf of Mexico, being heavier than the freshwater, begins to creep upstream. But it doesn't mix. It moves along the very bottom of the river channel, a hidden wedge of pure ocean advancing inland. The surface of the river can remain entirely fresh. You could dip your hand in it and taste nothing unusual. But 45 feet below, a river of salt is moving against the current. The wedge can travel miles ahead of where surface readings detect it. It is an invisible invasion. The first communities in its path are in Plaquemines Parish, a long, narrow strip of land that juts out into the Gulf, flanking the final miles of the river. These communities pull their municipal drinking water directly from the Mississippi. Their intake pipes suck in what has always been an endlessly renewable source of fresh water. But in June of 2023, those pipes started sucking in salt. The Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, sets a maximum secondary standard of 250 parts per million for chloride in public drinking water. Above that level, the water begins to taste salty. It can cause health issues for people with hypertension or kidney disease. But more immediately, it begins to destroy the infrastructure itself. The increased salinity corrodes metal pipes, leaching lead and other contaminants into the water supply. It eats away at plumbing, water heaters, and industrial equipment. It kills crops if used for irrigation. For over 200 consecutive days, the drinking water in parts of Plaquemines Parish was compromised. Undrinkable, unusable, a population surrounded by water was dying of thirst. This is where the United States Army Corps of Engineers, under the command of Major General Kimberly A. Peoples during the height of the crisis, entered the fight. Their mission on the Mississippi is twofold: keep the channel open for navigation and keep the salt out. Faced with the advancing wedge, they deployed their most audacious weapon. At a precise location known as River Mile 64, near the community of Myrtle Grove, they began construction of the underwater sill. The concept is brutally simple. The Corps' dredgers, massive floating vacuum cleaners, suck up sediment from the river bottom and dump it in a concentrated line across the entire width of the channel. Ton by ton, they build a massive ridge of sand and mud on the river floor, an artificial mountain rising from the depths. This submarine levee acts as a physical barrier. The heavy saltwater wedge, creeping along the bottom, smashes into this underwater wall. It cannot go through it. It cannot go under it. It is tripped up, forced upward into the faster-moving freshwater current near the surface, where it is diluted and flushed back out into the Gulf of Mexico. It is an act of incredible, desperate engineering, building a wall you cannot see in the middle of a flowing river to stop an invisible enemy. And it worked. The advance of the saltwater wedge was halted, but the solution created its own set of problems. The sill, by its very nature, creates a shallow point in the river, a new hazard for the deep draft ocean going vessels that need a 50-foot channel to reach the ports of New Orleans and Baton Rouge. So the Corps has to perform a delicate balancing act. They build the sill high enough to stop the salt, but then they must notch it, dredge a deeper channel through a section of it, to allow ships to pass. When the river flow drops further and the saltwater threat intensifies, they have to close the notch and rebuild the sill. It is a constant, expensive, exhausting battle, and even with the sill, the damage was already done. To provide immediate relief to Plaquemines Parish, the Corps had to resort to the most basic solution imaginable. They loaded barges with fresh water from further upriver, over 132 million gallons of it, and physically transported it downstream to the struggling water treatment plants. They were using the river to ship water to the people living on the banks of that same river. It was a logistical nightmare. A symbol of a system pushed to its absolute breaking point. We're moving into the political and future-facing part of this story. And I know I mentioned it before, but it's critically important. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It's the only way we track if these deep dives are worth the immense effort they take to produce. All right, back to it. The sill was a solution to a crisis, but the crisis itself never ended. The rains that briefly fell, the temporary rises in river level, they were illusions. A brief reprieve in a much longer war. Federal hydrologists and water managers are no longer talking about a drought. They are talking about a new baseline. The years 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025, and now 2026 are not a statistical anomaly like the droughts of 1988 or 2012. They represent a permanent, frightening shift in the hydrology of the central United States. The baseline has shifted. In June of 2026, the flow at Memphis was sitting at just 28% of its normal volume. This is the new normal. And it means the Army Corps of Engineers is now in a state of perpetual warfare. Their fleet of dredgers, the machines that keep the navigation channel from silting in, now work around the clock, 7 days a week. The most famous of these is the USIS dredge potter, a colossal dustpan dredge originally built in the 1930s during the Great Depression and repowered in 2001. A 90-year-old machine is one of America's primary defenses against economic collapse. The work is meticulous and relentless. The potter lowers a 30-foot wide dustbin-shaped head to the riverbed, and powerful pumps suck up a slurry of mud and water. That slurry is then pumped through a long floating pipe and discharged outside the navigation channel, keeping the watery highway clear. The operators on these dredges are some of package the most skilled mariners in the world. They must navigate a constantly changing riverbed, reading the currents and the sediment with an almost intuitive feel. There is one detail that speaks to the precision required. The dredge operators must constantly check the color of the mud being spewed from the discharge pipe. They know the exact shade of khaki brown that signifies the right mixture of sand and silt. If the color is wrong, it means the massive underwater vacuum could be clogged or digging into the wrong material. A jam could shut down the dredge, and a shutdown, even for a few hours, could allow the channel to shoal up, potentially stalling millions of dollars of cargo. The color of money, on the Mississippi, is the color of mud. This constant dredging, this emergency sill construction, this is the reality of the new baseline. It is a reactive, defensive posture against a river that is no longer behaving the way it was engineered to. The river has changed. The infrastructure has not. And that has triggered a political awakening that is almost as powerful as the drought itself. From the headwaters in Minnesota to the Delta in Louisiana, mayors from over 100 cities and towns along the river have banded together. They are led by the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative, or MRCTI, and its executive director, Colin Wellenkamp. For years, they have watched the river vacillate between catastrophic floods and historic droughts. And they have concluded that the old way of managing the river, a fragmented state-by-state approach, is no longer viable. They are pushing for something unprecedented in the river's history, a binding Mississippi River Compact. The idea is modeled loosely on the 1922 Colorado River Compact, an agreement that divided that river's water among 7 states. But this would be for a new era, and for a much more complex river system. A compact would force all 10 main stem states, from north to south, to work together on a unified plan for water management, infrastructure investment, and disaster resilience. It would replace a patchwork of competing interests with a unified strategy for survival. According to Wellenkamp, there is a surge of support for the idea, a recognition that the relentless cycle of climate emergencies has made cooperation essential. But the political challenges are immense. The water priorities of a city in Minnesota, concerned with preserving lake levels at the headwaters, are fundamentally different from those of a parish in Louisiana, desperate to keep the ocean at bay. Getting 10 states with competing economies and political agendas to agree on how to share and manage this resource is a monumental task. The fight is just beginning. This sense of a long unfolding crisis was captured in a single moment on June 12, 2026. On a bluff overlooking the river in Vicksburg, Mississippi, Major General Kimberly Peoples, who had led the Corps' Mississippi Valley Division through the worst of the low-water years, relinquished her command. She passed the torch to the new commanding general, Lieutenant William H. Butch Graham, Jr. It was a routine military ceremony, but the context was anything but. As the command changed hands, the river gauge at Memphis sat near negative 10.8 feet. The crisis peoples fought was now the crisis Graham inherited. The problem outlasts the people. It is a war of attrition, and the opponent is the climate itself. The cost of this war is staggering. The $20 billion in economic damage from a single year of disruption is a conservative estimate. The cost of the perpetual dredging, the construction and maintenance of the underwater sill, the emergency freshwater deliveries, it all adds up to a hidden tax on the American economy. But the cost of inaction is infinitely higher. If the barges stop, the American agricultural system breaks. If the saltwater reaches the water intakes for New Orleans and surrounding refineries and chemical plants, a vital hub of American industry goes dark. The Corps is not just defending a river. It is defending a cornerstone of the nation's economic and national security. I know, it's the third time. But seriously, just check if you're subscribed. We get comments all the time from people who thought they were subscribed, but weren't. Think of it as a final fact check for this video. You have no idea how much we appreciate it. So we return to the central question. The dredging, the underwater wall, the political maneuvering. Is it a solution, or is it a delay? The answer is unavoidable. It is buying time. The underwater sill at River Mile 64 is the engineering equivalent of a tourniquet. It stops the bleeding in one place, but it does not cure the underlying disease. The disease is a continental-scale water deficit, a fundamental lack of rain and snowmelt 1,000 miles upstream. The engineers in Louisiana are treating the symptoms because they have no power to cure the cause. Everything hinges on the weather in the Ohio Valley, on snowpack in the Rockies, on forces that are becoming less predictable every year. The Mississippi, the great river of the Anishinaabe people, the artery of a nation, has become fragile. It is a fully engineered system, a product of levees and locks and dams, and that system is now entirely dependent on a temporary pile of sand at the bottom of the river and the hope for rain in a distant state. It is a system showing signs of cascading failure. The saltwater that threatens drinking water also pushes into the delicate freshwater marshes of the delta, killing the vegetation that holds the coastline together and provides the first and most vital line of defense against hurricanes. One crisis compounds another. The story of the Mississippi River in the 21st century is not one of majestic, untamable power. It is a story of vulnerability, a story of a system so vast and so critical that its failure is almost unimaginable. And yet, the signs of that failure are now measured every single day in negative numbers on a gauge in Memphis. The underwater wall bought time. Time for the rains to return. Time for politicians to act. Time for a nation to realize that its most important highway is running dry. Whether that time gets used wisely is not an engineering question. The dredgers will keep working. The wall will be rebuilt. Out in the Gulf, the ocean is patient.